Anne to take it away with today's event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Candace. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Anne Hesse, and I lead the Democrats Abroad Global Women's Caucus. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who've taken the time to join this call from around the world. We welcome you to today's discussion with Professor Dustie Spencer on political framing, building bridges in divided communities. I'm joined today in hosting by the Democrats Abroad International Chair, Candace Kerriston, and GWC leaders Carol Moore and Christina Skosgard. I am excited to welcome Professor Spencer here today to help us kick off a project that is very dear to my heart, framing political discourse and finding ways to communicate with friends and family on radically opposite sides of the political divide. It's easy to dismiss these people as stupid or evil, but in many cases, they're our friends, our neighbors, our work colleagues and family, our own parents, sisters, and brothers, people we love. And they're not stupid or evil. Well, okay, maybe some of them are. But when rudimentary attempts to teach our kids about slavery are framed as teaching our kids to hate themselves, and when efforts to divert tiny amounts of spending from military-style policing equipment to social services is called anti-police, or when electrical impulses in a blob of cell tissue is called a heartbeat, and grown women lose sovereignty over their own bodies, we know we have a serious communication problem. And in light of the seemingly unstoppable attacks on voting rights, it's time to realize that certain voters will have an easier time of it than others in the upcoming midterms. Thanks to a slew of voter suppression laws and extreme gerrymandering, certain voters, especially those comfortably living inside red districts, will have an advantage. So if we want our democracy to survive, we're going to have to find a way to persuade these privileged red voters to quietly, intelligently, and with kindness infiltrate the red zone. So how do we do this? Well, our idea at GWC was to launch a project to build our skills at framing and communicating, starting today and continuing through the midterms elections and well beyond. We're putting together a series of expert webinars, skill building workshops, both online and in person when we can, and an online toolkit with extra materials and resources we can all access. All of this with the goal of helping us to develop the skills we need to cross those bridges that divide us and persuade our skeptical fellow citizens on issues that matter to all of us, issues that in many cases we fundamentally agree upon. Ronald Reagan once claimed that he had not left the Democratic Party, but rather the Democratic Party had left him. Well, we want to help our members become an army of savvy communicators who have the skills to help their Republican and independent friends understand that today's GOP is not what it used to be and has in fact left everyone who believes in democracy. One thing I've learned over my years as a Democrats Abroad leader is that there's a vast pool of knowledge and expertise within our own membership. So I would like to invite all of you out there with an interest in this project at any level to please get in touch with us. Even if you're not an expert yet, if you have interest, we can use your help. I hope to hear from some of you. And to all of you listening in today, please remember that we'll be gathering questions for Dr. Spencer from Zoom on the Q&A box and on Facebook where we're streaming live now. So you're welcome to type your questions in as we go along. I'll hand off to Candace now, who will introduce our panelists and lead our discussion. Candace?
Great. Thank you so much, Anne, for the introduction. And again, just my sincerest gratitude to you and Christina and Carol of the Global Women's Caucus, really in its entirety, and the leadership team for putting together today's event. And to you as well, Dr. Spencer, for joining us to talk about this really important issue. I just wanted to say a few words about Democrats Abroad and how this is connected, again, as Anne mentioned, to what it is that we're really setting out to do as an organization and more largely as the Democratic Party in the context of the 2022 races and beyond. So you might be wondering again, what is Democrats Abroad? If this is your first event, we're glad to have you here. If this is your millionth event, we're also glad to have you here. We are, in fact, the largest organization of US citizens outside of the United States. We are a community that really, really does affect change. If you aren't yet a member, I encourage you to go to democratsabroad.org today and join us in our movement. So as our organization talked about us affecting change, what do we do? It's really our mission at the end of the day to provide American citizens a voice in our government and to really elect Democratic candidates by mobilizing the overseas vote. So if you are an overseas voter, please request your ballot immediately for all 2022 races at votefromabroad.org. So much is at stake: 34 US Senate seats, a whole House of Representatives, 46 state legislatures, 36 governorships. The list goes on then at the local level as well. So a lot of important stuff on the ballot this year. But I wanted to come back a little bit of an extension of mobilizing the overseas vote and what that means. We as an organization, it's funny, in my position as international chair, have the pleasure of meeting a lot of members and leaders and volunteers out there. And it's funny because an overwhelming majority of us say that we come from Republican families, that we in a lot of ways are the black sheep, right? Who is the Democrat in the family, makes for very interesting conversations when we return from our residences abroad back to the United States. And I just really, again, want to thank Dr. Spencer for joining us because this event is so important. I know I'm looking forward to learning some things about how to connect and frame these conversations that we're having. We are important, but as overseas voters, without a doubt, but we also have a responsibility, in my opinion, to be engaging in these conversations. Simply not talking about the issue is not going to get us anywhere as a country. So really looking forward to hearing today's conversation and to discuss this more. So I'm excited. I'll toss it over to Carol to provide an introduction of Dr. Spencer, and then we will dig in. Carol?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that background, Anne and Candace. May I call Dr. Spencer Dustie, since she and I have met on Zoom a number of times. We first met when she joined the DA Florida team, of which I am co-chair, last summer. And in fact, she and I are actually dialing in from the opposite coast in Florida today. It was fantastic when we did connect, as she explained some of the basics in one of her areas of academic research, social movement theory, which was completely new to me. She was very keen to show how the techniques of framing as used by social movements can win people over on various issues and ideologies by first listening to their narratives and positioning the social movements narratives. This fit right into the concerns of the Global Women's Caucus, as Anne has just outlined. Dustie was keen to show how these techniques could be helpful to her Democratic colleagues, which was music to our ears. And by the way, today is a reminder of one of the most divisive issues in American politics. It is the 49th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade. Moving on, I want to say Dustie earned her PhD at the University of Edinburgh and is currently a visiting assistant professor at Pusan National University in South Korea, where she is also an activist with Democrats Abroad, Republic of Korea. As a professor of global studies, Dustie's teaching is interdisciplinary, and it spans conflict mediation, feminism, and social movement theory. Dustie, thank you for your willingness to share these approaches to better dialogue on the critical policy issues of the day. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much again for the lovely introductions. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. So I have some PowerPoint slides. I'll go ahead and get into that as soon as it lets me. Usually takes just a moment to get it set up, and then we can go. So a lot of this will be kind of intended for reference purposes. So there's going to be some definitions So I do come from an academic background, but also kind of from an activist background. So I'll try to not make it too technical as I go along, but they'll be there for reference for those that would like to have that reference. And the idea is that we'll build a kind of repertoire of activities or scenarios or workshops that we can actually use within our communities. And I'll get into that a little bit later on in the presentation. So again, the title of this presentation is Political Framing, Building Bridges in Divided Communities. And again, I am Dr. Dustie Spencer. I have a PhD from the University of Edinburgh, and I am a visiting assistant professor at the Department of Global Studies in Pusan National University. And I can be reached at dustiespencer@gmail.com much more easily than my Korean email, actually. So in this presentation, oops, I'm just trying to collapse this here. So in this presentation, I'm just going to go over a little bit on what is framing, how it can be, or how it is used, how it can be used also more effectively than we have used it in the past. Also covering some things from more conflict mediation, which are values, interests, and positions in conflict mediation and resolution. How can we use frames and conflict mediation tactics in divided communities, which is the crux of the issue today. So again, a little academic here, but I will connect it for you with contemporary issues and social movement and activism. So this idea of a social movement frame came into context by this sociologist, Irving Goffman, who cited that frames analysis denotes a schemata of interpretation that enables individuals to locate, perceive, identify, and label occurrences within their life spaces and the world at large. And basically what that means in a nutshell, what a frame is you take a picture and whatever it is in that picture, that's the story that you're telling, whatever that is. People do it with memes that we share. We take things out of context all the time. But basically, if you look at a picture, you have whatever's going on in that picture. You don't know what's happening outside of that picture. You're just capturing, that one entity or object that you're focusing in on in that picture. So that's kind of what a framing is. We want to capture the essence of an idea with a frame. And I'll build on that with some examples. But basically, as Kaufman et al. Says, we create frames to name a situation in which we find ourselves, which helps us to identify and interpret specific aspects that seem key to us in understanding a specific situation and to communicate and interpret the situation to others. So there is, on the one hand, an individual cognitive perception, but then there's also a collective cognitive perception. And this is used in mobilization campaigns. So as an example, you might have a social movement organization or campaign that's discussing human rights, right? So maybe they have some campaign to end FGM, or maybe there's some campaign like in the States to prevent anti-abortion measures. But we can frame both of those maybe rather different campaigns around the overarching frame of human rights. And this is something that we can all understand. We can all pretty much agree, that somebody shouldn't be tortured or abused in some way in a foreign country, but it can be very different campaigns. And I'll have a few more examples of that. So I'll go ahead and continue on. And I have these here just again for reference if you want to look at some of those. So another aspect, and this is another aspect that someone else in the Global Women's Caucus who's active, who I wanted to hopefully get on board, talks a bit about narratives. And narratives are storied accounts of happenings that connect the past to the present, as well as to an anticipated future. Essentially, movements discuss and conceive their interaction with others as narratives. It's kind of a storytelling exercise. It's complete with heroes, villains, and a plot. It's kind of, and these building blocks of those narratives categorize different agents and characters. By maintaining these narratives, actors are able to construct a situation, make judgments about the intentions of others, and decide upon a course of action. And this is a pretty important tool or technique when framing a particular campaign or a particular issue in a particular way. It's easy for us to say who is the villain. If we're talking again, going on the example of abortion, we might say the villain's the woman who's having an abortion, or the doctor's the villain, who's having an abortion. And, the heroes are, I don't know, the pro-life people who want to protect babies or something like that. And we have these, we've heard these all the time. If you're familiar with, the George W. Bush administration, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, the whole axis of evil. It was very clear. He was very good and illustrative at painting a picture and storytelling. And people really get on board with that that storytelling, and that really helps you to kind of understand and accept a particular narrative. Narratives answer what's going on, what is being said, what does this mean, and how should I or how should we as a collective respond? And social movement leaders or participants, government actors, media, and other stakeholders regularly frame events with a particular narrative. Again, I'm going to take that example of you take one picture. We don't know what's going on outside that picture. We don't really have the context, but we can take one picture and we can have a story. We can paint a picture, paint the rest of the story around that picture. And so the pictures here, you have the human crowd gathered at Obama's inauguration in 2009 to the left, compared to the crowd at Donald Trump's inauguration. Now, of course, if you remember, this is where the whole alternative facts, thing kind of came out, where basically a spokesman for Trump said that that the inauguration was larger, there was more people at Donald J. Trump's inauguration than at Obama's inauguration. And it's blatantly untrue. If you just look at the pictorial evidence and you look at the numbers, it's untrue. What is true is that after the inauguration, the Women's March happened, which had many more participants than the people who actually showed up to Trump's inauguration. That's just a nice little tidbit. But basically, the idea here is that you can paint a picture and you fill in the gaps that the picture doesn't say. So you can claim that there's more people at my inauguration, there's less people at yours, and if you say otherwise, it's an alternative fact. You frame it in a particular way. But to be fair, we don't really know what's happening. If you just take this picture, say on the right-hand side, now obviously statistically we know for a fact that yes, there were less people at Trump's inauguration than Obama's. But if we're just looking at the pictures, we don't actually know. Like the right picture could have been after people had been dispersed. Maybe the left picture, was, at the height of the speech or something like that. But either way, that's just a very good pictorial example of framing and narratives around framing. So part of framing is this conceptual architecture that we have these collection or collective action frames, which again, a little academic here, bear with me, coherent set of action-oriented beliefs and meanings that legitimize and inspire social movements, campaigns, and activities. And essentially what this is this is what's going to get people from the balcony to the barricades. That's a phrase we use a lot, like social movements. So this is getting people from, maybe just sympathizing with a movement to actually becoming active for a particular movement. And the way you do that is you mobilize people by using a collective action frame that's going to get them energized, that's going to mobilize them to action. And this could be around human rights. This could be maybe something quite shocking, and usually we talk about master framing tools, which is can be like an umbrella, a theoretical, flexible frame, which is adopted or supported by many different movements. Civil rights is supported by people from all walks of life, right? Women's movements can be supported by people, of all demographic backgrounds, even men, and human rights is supported by people of all different backgrounds, and it covers a wide range of campaigns. It's applicable to so many different campaigns, self-determination campaigns, women's human rights, children's rights, immigration rights. All of these can be categorized as human rights. And this is one of the major tools that people use, as well as injustice frames, which is also used as well in different campaigns, such as BLM and other injustice frames, where there's lots of injustice, as well as women's human rights as well. So these are some master framing tools and techniques that are used in order to communicate to the public about a particular issue. And politicians, political entrepreneurs, the media, they will frame a particular issue using one of these frames, using one of these tools or techniques. I just have this picture here on the right-hand side. It's an example of somebody framing that the abortion, anti-abortion laws as a reproductive health issue, right? So it's a health issue, because we're saying if you ban abortion, then people are going to do it anyway, and it's a health-related issue, which of course many people can think about. Even people who are very much maybe pro-life can also empathize that abortion may be medically necessary at some point in time. So this is kind of like reproductive health is one of those kind of building bridges techniques across campaigns. So we say we should have the right to legal abortion because it's reproductive. It's a health care issue. It's a health issue, not a religious or issue or something like that. So we talked a little bit about already the 1972 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. It essentially framed abortion as this sort of read it here, as a church-state issue. And from this anti-abortion and pro-abortion, these different sides proactively renamed themselves as pro-life and as pro-choice, as the pro-life movement sought to position itself in a more secular space. So they wanted to reach out to non-religious people because they just wouldn't be able to get the support if they only reached out to other people who were quite religious. So they reached out to non-religious people and people who did not necessarily share their religious understandings of the issue. And the pro-choice movement defensively repositioned itself to emphasize its defense of contraception and personal responsibility, with abortion as a necessary backup to failed contraception. In this manner, both sides have actually adopted the civil rights master frame. So this is quite interesting. So you have two very different ideologically positioned issues or reasonings or logically reasoning about an issue. But they have adopted the same civil rights master frame. And this is a really interesting tool because, and it's quite scary, because these are things like, if you look at civil rights issues, you look at human rights, nobody's going to say, no, I don't believe in human rights. Nobody's going to say, no, I don't believe in civil rights. However, you have these different conspiratorial movements like QAnon, who actually adopt the master frame of human rights when they talk about things like save the children, right? So they actually position themselves as being human rights oriented. And that's enabling them to get massive support where they wouldn't normally get support, right? So, you know, the people who believed, or, you know, in these kind of wild, kind of wacky conspiracy theories kind of used to be quite a lot more isolated. But the way they were able to get a lot of people on board, especially women on board, was they used this human rights framing of the issue. They said we need to save the children from predators and things like that. Nobody's going to say, no, I don't, you know, I think, you know, nobody's going to say, oh, no, actually, I think, you know, children shouldn't be, you know, protected. Obviously, that's something we can all agree with, that children should be protected from predators. But obviously, it's a false narrative. But they have framed the issue in this human rights issue, which is quite scary. But we can see how, you know, from, you know, kind of, if they can do it, certainly, you know, left-leaning people and Democrats can reframe issues in a manner that gets more people on board. So to finish off this, basically the pro-life movement stresses the right of the fetus to life, while the pro-choice movement stresses the right of the woman to control a fundamental aspect of her life. So again, this is that example of using two ideologically very different points or perspectives on a particular issue, but using one master framing technique on that. Let me go ahead and try to see if I can. So continuing on with this conceptual architecture, we have different core framing tactics. There's the diagnostic, motivation, or prognostic and motivational. So basically it's saying, what's the problem? Who is to blame? Here's a proposed solution to the problem. And then the motivational framing is basically the elaboration of the problem call to arms. This is like, you might have seen the word liar, untrustworthy. And they always said crooked Hillary. They kept talking about crooked Hillary. And you might be familiar, some of you are probably familiar with George Lakoff, who talked about political discourse and framing. And he wrote that book, Don't Think of an Elephant. And of course, if you tell someone don't think of an elephant, the first thing you're going to think of is an elephant. And same thing with crooked Hillary. If you keep talking about crooked Hillary, then that's what you're going to associate Hillary Clinton with. So the right wing, people who weren't supportive of her, basically they were able to all perceive her as some kind of villain in this narrative. She's crooked, she's corrupt, we don't like her. And it was like a matter of fact. People were able to accept that because they kept driving that point home. And then on the other hand, there's like, we have so many different things that we talked about. She's experienced, she's smart, she's strong, she's intelligent. There wasn't really one thing that she was like super superior at, right? So maybe that's like, it's a little more nitpicky maybe in that way, but that's kind of an example of core framing tactics. We have who's to blame, what's the problem, proposed solution, motivational framing. So we have, you know, Trump did this. We need, the problem are the Democrats, they're crooked. We need to clean the swamp. You need to vote for me and get rid of them and send them to jail or whatever. Now, the good news here is we have a process whereby we can actually articulate and elaborate a frame that connects a lot of different issues. And I talked about that in human rights issues or civil rights issues or injustice frames. And this is a tool called frame alignment or bridging processes, where you link two ideologically congruent, but maybe structurally disconnected frames regarding a particular issue. The environmental activists have done this really, really well, as well as the WTO protests, so people who are like against free trade for whatever reason. In Seattle, you had, you might have heard of like, there was like a movie, Battle of Seattle, 1999. And in that and in other World Trade Organizations protest movements, you can see how you have people who are very much to the far right. They they're like anti-liberal policies. They don't want free trade. They want to protect their jobs at home or whatever. And then you have people on like the far left who are maybe supporting Marxist tendencies even, and they don't want, they also don't want trade. They don't want their workers to lose jobs, and they don't want workers in other countries to be abused because of free trade practices. So you have a real huge conglomeration of people from farmers to workers to people from the left, people from the right, and they're all getting together around this one big issue. You did have quite a lot of this during like the Occupy movement as well. You had people from a wide spectrum of backgrounds that were getting together around this one issue because they were able to frame or bridge their issues by framing it in a particular way. So this is a tool that we can use when we're talking about different issues like abortion or the environment or voting rights, for example. These are a couple of different more frame resonance, how frames resonate with us. It gives us the credibility and the salience of framing efforts. Here I have juxtaposed on the left-hand side, my body, my choice, which we're assuming means my body, my choice when it comes to abortion and reproductive rights, versus my body, my choice, say no to masks or vaccines. So it's quite interesting that they're using a very similar slogan as, bodily autonomy for both, again, two very different issues or campaigns. But that is like kind of one tool you can agree, yeah, sure. Your body, your choice, my body, my choice too. But that's just one way to do it. But there are some hazards in this too. They can be ambiguous or they can misframe or can cause more disputes in the process of doing that. I'm going to touch really quick here on news framing. And a study is done that it's a process by which certain facets of social reality are emphasized by the news media while others are pushed to the background. And this framing affects research focus on how citizens interpret and understand a news frame. Now, they found that prolonged exposure rather than exposure to a single article or an ad is key here. So if you watch Fox News or you read, a very right-wing sort of article or something, or you get a meme or somebody, sends you a story or something and it's very, far right or it's conspiratorial, you're not going to suddenly, become a militant, QAnon or something like that. It's rather prolonged exposure. It's kind of going down that rabbit hole. It's clicking this, going down this, like, keep going, keep going, keep going. Then you will take that on board. So breaking that news cycle is quite important. And I don't have time to really go into it for this, this presentation, but basically AI algorithms really point us into a direction where we can continue to go to that rabbit hole. Oh, you liked this video, maybe you'll also like this video, maybe you'll also, you'll see this ad, targeted ad campaigns and that kind of thing. So it is a real problem on social media. And that is one of the issues that I think we're having with the divided communities is trying to expose people to kind of like the other side of the story and the other thing and trying to, really expose the lies and the alternative facts for what they are. And this is a really quick example of how news themselves can frame an issue. You had during the Hong Kong protests a couple of years ago, you had on the left-hand side here, there's a picture of, sorry, somebody had a comment here. Travelers avoid Hong Kong. Travelers avoiding Hong Kong in record numbers as airport posts nearly 1 million drop in passengers for November. And this is South China Morning Post. But then on the other hand, you have like around the same, very same time, you have in Al Jazeera, Hong Kong protests flare before Xi meeting with city leader. And obviously, the pictures on the left-hand side, people kind of orderly, in the departures, kind of milling about. On the right-hand side, this poor girl is being pinned to the floor by people with, with riot gear or whatever, that look like they're in the military. So basically, we can ask, like, what are the messages? What are the different framings of those messages? And you can do that with a lot of things. One of the activities that I have my own students do is take 2 different articles that are on the same event and see how they are represented. Here's another example. More recently, pictures are usually there for no accident. So we have this one where we have Texas Governor Abbott still refuses to add rape and incest exemptions to abortion law. And the picture, I love this picture. He's just sitting there smiling, like he's, smirking about this thing, like he's, and then the other one, I don't know which one is, but it says Texas Governor Greg Abbott defends abortion law, says state will eliminate rape, and we have a much more serious look to him. So that's just another kind of example. And again, these are kind of activities that you can do in smaller community groups. You can look at those and see how they're framing these issues. Another one on framing migrants with more pictures than words. And I don't have a lot of time to go into that, but you can review it. So I wanted to turn now to the second part, which is people tend to frame political arguments or building bridges strategically. So people tend to frame political arguments in terms of their own values. But when arguing across party lines, it's much more effective to frame your arguments in terms of your opponent's values. For instance, environmental issues are often framed in terms of the harm pollution wreaks on the environment. However, when environmental issues are reframed in terms of the conservative value of purity, emphasizing the importance of keeping our forests, drinking water, and skies pure, conservatives are much more likely to support this cause. And I have a link here if you wanted to look at that article. And this in particular reminds me of a conversation that I had with my own father, who is Republican. And this was looking at, again, environmental degradation caused by climate change. And I have this as an example here. It doesn't matter whether we think global warming is a natural occurrence or a result of human behavior and impact. We need to start considering the dialogue about where to resettle people. We need to think about those things. We need to think about damage control. My father, who was mentioned, my Republican father, he believes that climate change is just a natural human occurrence. There's nothing that, humans really don't have a huge impact on it. I, of course, believe that well, yes, we do have an impact on it, and we can do something about that. But we both agree that we want clean air, we want clean water. We don't want to breathe dirty air. We shouldn't have, people shouldn't be polluting. So in the end, it doesn't matter really. You can argue until you're blue in the face. You don't have to necessarily agree on these things. And that's what part of the ideas behind building bridges and looking at, people's values and their interests rather than just their positions on an issue. So if you look at the position on the issue, positionally, my father believes, climate change is a natural occurrence. And my position is that it's, of course, exacerbated by human polluting. But we both agree, and it is in our interests, to have clean water, to have clean air. And, maybe it would be in our interest also that when there are climate disasters, that we have good early warning systems in place, that, we build infrastructure that's going to withstand higher sea level rise and that kind of thing. So these are things that we can agree on, and we did agree on this. There's a very recently bipartisan legislation passed on the infrastructure bill. So we do agree on some things, and we have to kind of get beyond the positions and get down to these like fundamental interests and needs that are kind of below the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. And this is used quite a lot in conflict mediation and resolution. And how you discover that, how you discover the difference between somebody's positions and their interests and needs is through dialogue. What do? You ask questions. And this is, again, communication skills are quite key for understanding the difference of values and interests and needs. And I'll get more into that. So positions are what each side say that they want. You know, I want tax breaks or whatever, but their interests may be hidden underlying motivations. You know, maybe they, you know, somebody's interests tend to be more personal, more abstract. Maybe it's less clear cut. If we're talking about environment, again, the interest might be, you know, we want clean air, we want clean water. We still want those things, but the interest might be that we don't want to prevent development. We don't want to make it more difficult for companies to do their business. So once we understand exactly what those values or those interests are, we can then come to a better way to reframe our own positions to make it more palatable for the other person that we're bargaining with. And in order to understand this, we need to understand perceptions, life experiences, needs, prejudices, what people's emotions and fears are, their subjective experiences of the world. And doing that, again, it involves communication skills. Again, this is an activity that I would have like my students in conflict mediation do, where they try to uncover people's interests through dialogue and through asking a lot of questions. And the way we do that, you probably heard of the old adage, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use those in that ratio. So listening and then probing further. What do you mean by that? You know, how do you feel about this? You know, why do you feel that way about that? You know, that kind of thing. Try to understand somebody's, you know, individual needs by evaluating maybe some hidden interests that they have. And that's something that we use in conflict mediation. It's something that we use in sales. You know, it's, you know, when you have that old thing in sales, you say, sell me this pen, and you ask somebody, you know, so, you know, what kind of pen do you want? And, you know, what color pen, or what do you want to use the pen for? And then you say to them, you know, well, I have this pen, and it is exactly what you want, and it's exactly this style, etc. And that's basically the, you know, the bottom line when it comes to, you know, bargaining and talking about conflict mediation. It's very similar across you know, whether you're doing marketing or you're negotiating on who's going to do the dishes for the night, or where you're going out for date night or something like that. It is a useful tool. Try it. Just ask people. Ask people lots of questions. Take one person that you know. Ask them some questions and try to and sell back to them what it is that you talk to them about. Now, values, they cannot be positioned away. So values, they cannot be bargained away, rather. Values are bedrock values. They're conscious or unconscious. They're powerful drivers of negotiation. The starting point for action rather than the goal, and unlike interests, they are fundamentally not negotiable. You can't bargain away. So this is, you can't, so you can, if you understand somebody's interests, then you can help to reframe their position a little bit. But if you understand somebody's values, you have to understand that that's something you can't change. This is like a moral compass, an internal moral compass. They're not going to change that. You may not be able to convince a pro-life person to accept abortion, but maybe we can convince them that abortion should be legal for another person in certain circumstances or something like that. Maybe we can make the argument that it should be legal And here's some reasons why. But obviously, you're never going to get them to accept the fact that it's not, maybe a life at conception, for example. These are things that you just can't convince somebody that otherwise. But it also may be a source of common ground as well. If you understand somebody's values, if you understand like somebody's values is like human rights, then you can also align your values to that. And here I have two different, again, juxtaposition. We need clean energy or nuclear energy is our obvious right. And then stop sanctions against, Iraq. So this is kind of the overarching frame that I'm using here is, anti-sanctions. So anti-sanctions because it impedes somebody's, human rights. For example, it's not basically intended towards maybe the intended targets. And again, those are things that you can maybe try to make some connections with on some strategic issues that maybe community-based issues. The idea here is to dig deeper to separate positions from interests and to uncover values that cannot be bargained away. And something we say, and again, is control what you can control. Just focus on that. I think a lot of people get into arguments about some of these issues because they try to convince people of things they're never going to give up. They're just never going, it's never going to happen. So you have to figure out where you can build those bridges. So key to effective negotiation is looking behind positions to identify values and interests. And in order to do this, you can identify your own values and beliefs first, and then you can identify the values and beliefs of the other party. So when you're going into communicating with maybe a friend or family member who thinks very differently from you, really evaluate your own values, opinions, and beliefs first before you ask questions. But asking questions, again, that helps to not only gather information, but it builds rapport with the person you're communicating with. And again, you want to try to look at not get yes or no questions, not try to get the last word or prove them wrong, but be empathetic about it and ask open-ended questions. Why do you feel that way? How does that make you feel? Why, etc., that kind of thing. And you can probe further. Make sure that you're listening. Repeat back to them, perhaps, what they said. So you're saying you believe this because of this, that, and the other thing. Why is that? Probing. Empowering solutions, empowering or solutions focused questions can happen after that. That empowers the person and makes them feel like they are still in control of the conversation. And then you can go into forming possibility questions. And now these are like very, obviously, it was very quick run through of some of these things, but these are different activities that can be done in community, like workshops and community building exercises and public engagement exercises as well. But these are definitely kind of, I think, intended more towards, you can use them certainly in the classroom. I use them in the classroom, but you can also use them to kind of have role-playing exercises within your own communities. So maybe your county, Democrats, or your particular caucus or local people, you can do different workshops and do like role-playing activities amongst with each other to help understand and in practice how this actually works when you're talking to your friends or family members. As a summary, these are different from different conflict models. They can help us, but it's not always an objective area. You can't quantify everything. There's lots of interwoven parts. Identities are very salient, and values and interests are really at the root of somebody's stated positions. Some techniques towards understanding those values and interests can help you become a better negotiator. It can help you communicate better and understand why a friend or family member feels a certain way about an issue. And this is just a little summary box here that we want to look at, interests, not positions. Don't accept positions at face value, get behind them, understand the underlying needs of the person, be empathetic, know your own drivers, your own values, your own interests, and use questions skillfully to build an understanding and trust. And everyone has multiple interests, but be clear about your own and the other parties, which are more important. So as a kind of a quick summarial conclusion on communicating with others in this practice is listen to the core values and issues, express an interest, probe further, be empathetic, ask why questions, repeat and confirm, identify the key frames of the issues and values. Are we talking about this from a justice perspective? Are they using a civil rights perspective? Because then you can actually communicate your own position using those ideologically congruent framing techniques and say, well, I also, believe that this is a human rights issue, or I also, believe in, that this is a justice issue. And you can see if you can use these framing alignment or bridging to your own mutual interest. Health for all people, clean air, quality of life, retaining US international dominance. Maybe that's something that you're interested in, or maybe that's someone else is interested in retaining US international dominance. So you can say, well, education for all, better access to quality education is really what's going to help international, US dominance or something like that, or coming out of COVID, human rights issues, civil liberties, etc. And again, these are things that can be kind of filled out further in those maybe follow-up sort of exercises, which I do hope that I can get, myself and maybe some other volunteers to maybe look at doing some kind of workshops on communication and listening exercises to really use some of these tools in practice. And here we go, like keep calm, listen, and remember that you just can't control everything. And some people you can say, I respect your position, I disagree, and walk away, because you're just not going to get anywhere. But try to reason with people and at least try to have a decent and humane and empathetic conversation to build those bridges, even if you can't conclude to agree with one another. So there will be additional resources forthcoming on things like framing, mediation, or storytelling can be used for community building and engagement. Right, so thanks for listening. And now I'll go ahead and I guess turn it over. I'll stop my screen share and we'll go ahead and do some Q&A.
Hey. Well, thank you so much, Dusty. I can't wait to get into one of your workshops and do some role playing. I have so much to learn. I don't know how to do this, and I have a lot of friends and family who I want to talk to. Maybe it would be fun right now to ask our people to type in the chat box if they can. Who of you have Republican friends and family that you'd like to talk to about the way that Dusty has described to us? Any of you? I sure do. As Candace said at the beginning, I'm afraid we all have a lot of family we really need to connect with. So I would like to start off with questions. We have quite a few questions coming in and here and there, but I'd like to start off with this question. You mentioned that successful messaging, successful framing is about repeating one single message over and over again, like the right-wing media, like Fox News does so well. But my question then would be, how do we act as one party, one voice, and yet maintain our individuality, which we really are quite proud of as Democrats? Unlike the Republicans, who more often than not march in lockstep with their leadership, I feel that we need to reflect the multiple views of our members as Democrats. So how do we make progress and avoid infighting while still speaking with one voice and pounding that issue over and over again? How do we do that?
All right, so thank you. First of all, I would argue that most Republicans aren't march in lockstep. And I think that that is a common misconception about Democrats from Republicans, as well as the other way around. I think that they think that we do have this one single issue, and we think that they do. But actually, I think that that's, like you said in the beginning of the seminar, you know, I didn't turn my back on the Democratic Party, it turned back on me, you know, et cetera. So I think that that's not necessarily the case. Now, how do we act as one party with a single voice, but also acknowledging that we have many different issues or campaigns, many different opinions and identities? And that I kind of think comes back to some of that collective action frames that we talked about. So they may have very different ways to approach or many different campaigns that are more passionate about than others, but we can't always get on board with these kind of master frames like human rights. Nobody's going to disagree about human rights. Nobody's going to disagree necessarily about civil rights, you know, but we may have different approaches to that, as we've seen, of course, with COVID lockdown and that kind of thing. But we can, you know, also be empathetic in that and try to align ourselves strategically by using some of those master frames that people just aren't going to disagree on, such as human rights.
Okay, Christina, can you, would you like to ask the next question? And then maybe after Christina, then Candace might share some of the questions in the chat.
I have several questions. I'm also thinking human rights, voting rights, but that's another question. My question to you right now is that I feel that media bears a large responsibility for spreading misinformation. It is reported that more than 20 million viewers watch Fox News daily. If viewers believe what they hear, it's not surprising that they feel betrayed by our government. Many believe, I just heard it the other day on CNN, that people believe the Democrats helped instigate January 6th. So how do we combat fake news? And how do we talk to our friends and family about buying into this propaganda?
So again, it's like going back to that one thing I was talking about with news framing, is yes, constant exposure is what does it. It's not, you know, the one-off exposure, it is constant exposure. And unfortunately, when somebody's been through that constant exposure, it's very difficult to break that cycle. So the best thing that we can do is try to approach them again with some of these similar tools and techniques of trying to understand their interests and values and trying to relate to them in some way, rather than, you know, just saying, well, you know, what you're watching is absolute rubbish, and you know, why don't you look at this other news? But rather try to be friendly about it and empathetic to really understand how they came to the conclusions they came to. And then maybe we can start to bring them in with maybe some other better news sources or, you know, different articles and that kind of thing that can help. But again, it's a process. Somebody doesn't get, you know, they don't go Republican or like extreme right wing overnight. They're not going to go the other way overnight either. So it is a process, but we can engage them. And I would encourage people to engage them with empathy and understanding rather than attacking them, because, you know, it didn't happen overnight.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to jump in as you suggested with, I see we have a few questions from our viewers. I wanted to share one, Dr. Spencer, from Hassan, who asks, hi from Ireland. Thank you, Dr. Spencer, for the brilliant and fascinating presentation. Given the grave importance of this issue, how do you feel that the Democrats can best frame issues of climate change and sustainability to climate skeptics who might think that the whole thing is just a conspiracy? And I'd be interested just to add a little bit of that. I come from a very religious family, and one element that I'd like to bring into this, and you talked about this a little bit, is framing this in terms of religion. And if you have any thoughts on approaching it from that angle with family members, thank you.
All right, so thank you very much, Hassan and Candice. Sustainability is, I think, a really great way to actually talk about or reframe some of the issues. So with climate change, like I said before, when I was reflecting upon my conversation, with my own father and with other people, is that, you just can't, if they believe in their heart of hearts that there's nothing we can do to change it, then we can't convince them otherwise. But we can talk about those values and those interests that we share, such as not wanting, pollution, not wanting, wanting to have clean water, clean air. Even in China, people were complaining about not having, clean water and clean air. Just because somebody's communist, or living in a communist country doesn't mean that they don't want clean water or clean air. Everybody wants clean water and clean air. So these are things that we can, work on aligning those frames together in the same, like they were talking about purity in the one article that I had the excerpt from. But also I think sustainability is something that can bridge many different interests and values, many different positions, because, and there's actually this is kind of maybe a segue a little bit, but I was talking to somebody in a UN organization who said the only way that they can basically have any talks with North Korea is only when they talk about the sustainability issues. So even North Korea, which basically doesn't want to talk about anything, they will talk and they will coordinate with UN organizations on things like sustainability issues, because it's also, we have this one world and we have to take care of it, together, regardless of our political backgrounds. So I think that does kind of extend and cross a lot of different lines there positionally when you're talking about, politics. I think from a religious perspective, I think that we can also look at us as being stewards of the earth. So we've been given this earth by a creator, if that's what you believe. So it's our responsibility, just like our bodies may be a temple, to take care of our bodies. The earth is our responsibility to take care of as well. We shouldn't trash something that was given to us by God. That doesn't make sense. So I think that that's one way you can approach it, is that we are stewards of this creation, and that we can take care of it as we would hope or think that, our creator or Jesus might want us to take care of it as. So I think that that's one way that you can talk about it. And as far as whether or not, again, it's, that natural disasters or whatever are, happening because of the impact of human impact or not, again, would not be our, Christian or religious responsibility to help people out, to make sure that they have the infrastructure in place when there are higher rising, seas, make sure that people can be relocated where they need to be relocated. And this isn't just, that's not just an issue in Bangladesh. This is an issue in like Louisiana. This is an issue in Florida. People are going to be losing their homes and livelihoods. And we need to think about now how we're going to solve that, because we might not be able to turn back the tide on climate change. And I think that, whether you are Republican or Democrat, you can believe that it is our responsibility to help those other people that are going to be suffering from these potential, very, very near future natural disasters.
Okay, well, that's a great answer. It makes me feel a little bit better. I don't feel quite so anxious with an answer like that, I have to tell you. We have, again, questions from our viewers, but I'd like to get Carol's question in if I could, and then we'll go to Moira. Carol?
Thank you so much, Dusty. It was a tour de force for someone who has grappled with this, and the framework was so extensive. I look forward to the workshops. And my question is about the frames that are not working, like defund the police. And how do we respond to reframe and to correct these? And I'm thinking of, in terms of women's rights, childcare funding. We're not framing it in a way that's appealing to, I guess, to Republicans, but is there a way to turn that around? And what would you suggest?
Well, absolutely. And I don't have a specific answer. I don't have like a very witty, why don't we call it this?
No, I didn't expect that. But with defund the police,
yeah,
it is, you can see how it easily was misrepresented. And we don't seem to have yet worked out an alternative. I don't know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Defund the police. That is actually one in my social movements class that I go on about, like, why? Who thought of that one? Like, I just feel like it's because I know what they mean, but it's not, it's a bad framing. And honestly, I think, like, if you get down to it, pro-choice versus pro-life, I mean, who's not pro-life? Right. Obviously I'm pro-life, and it doesn't stop at, at the fetus. I'm pro everyone's life, but I think one of the ways that we can solve this, again, is looking at it at a community-based level, looking at having dialogue with people and trying to understand them better, because then that's the way that we can reframe it towards not just Republicans, but also swing voters and ourselves as Democrats, to really have a better collective action frame that really gets us fired up, about something. And the only way to do that, I think, is through, again, I'm from an academic background, so I'm going to say, community-based kind of focus groups, looking at doing some of the action-oriented research, I think is very critical. But it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be, a big, massive research focus. I mean, if somebody wants to, hand a big grant-funded research, then maybe that's something that we could work towards. But yeah, I think, looking at the community first, and then, maybe making collaborations from those community events to the larger caucuses and the Democrats at large. Because really, Florida Democrats might have a very different way of looking at it than Washington Democrats. That's also something that we need to look at too, is how we can form those collective action frames that are in a way that, as Anne was saying, that we continue to have our own identity as maybe Southern Democrats or, Northern Democrats, et cetera.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have a good question that came in from Moira. She asks, once we have good framing skills, how do we implement them on a scale that will have a state or nation impact required? Or to reframe the question, she says, who is currently framing issues? The key media, or the media is adopting the frame set by whom? It seems to happen so quickly and to be far from our control. Yeah.
Well, certainly, thank you, Maura. Yeah, so I think that's also a big question, which, again, I don't have like a definitive answer, but these are, I think, recognizing that, the media can frame issues however it is if they want to frame these issues. So it's our duty and our responsibility to try to frame it the best way that we can as Democrats, so that it picks up and that it becomes trendy, and you just can't help it that it's trendy, and that it's everywhere, whether it's news or social media. The Republicans can be really good at social media, using the algorithms to spell their to spell out, you know, what they want you to think about a particular issue. And I think the Democrats can do a lot better at doing that, in terms that we can understand better, you know, maybe intergenerationally, to get maybe younger people on board with it too. And I think that that's, again, that's going to be a process. But again, I'm still probably driving home this point again, that I think this comes from the community first, and the grassroots, that needs to kind of filter up to the top echelons of, you know, the Democrat Party, that needs to understand better its constituents and the swing voters and how it is that they're going to respond. And they can use those tools better in their advertisements, you know, whether it's individual political campaigns or the Democrat Party itself on the issues.
Okay. Candace, was there one more question from the chat?
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull that up. I see a question here from Johanna, excuse me. Would you recommend that we use more of the language that is persuasive to Republicans, like purity, to frame the issues? And if so, are there any other words like this that jump out that could be helpful in terms of framing our conversations?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, again, I wouldn't suggest completely, like, we're not going to convince hardcore Republicans to suddenly vote Democrat. So I think that we need to be careful about that too. But there are ways that we can reframe the issues that we can at least try to get more swing voters on board with it. And I think that's really the target market here. And I don't know whether purity itself is going to be the best one for that. And I think that that's something, again, it's an answer I don't have, because I haven't done like the legwork and the research. These are things that, you know, part of the purpose, I think, of the community workshops is to try to uncover, you know, the best ways to talk to friends and family about these issues. And then we can explore those in you know, better, you know, political advertisements and that kind of thing.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that answer on that. And I guess we have to ask one more question. I don't think any Democrats Abroad speaker leaves an event without having this posed to them, which is just in being a Democrat abroad yourself, what do you feel that we in our unique situations, being abroad, have to offer to the situation? If you had a final message to those US citizens overseas about this, what would it be?
Right. So I'm glad that you asked that. So I am, of course, part of the Democrats Abroad Republic of Korea. And I think that we can do better to reach out to the constituents in our, you know, in our own neighborhoods. And I think in particular, we need to do better at reaching out to the military and the military's families, because they are also, you know, they are also United States voting members abroad, and they're there and they're exposed to the same kinds of new ideas and stuff that we're exposed to, which, you know, for a lot of us, I think that, you know, some of us didn't go abroad as, you know, devout Democrats until we saw what life was like in other countries and we had a broader view of the world. And I feel like a lot of the military folks are feeling quite isolated because they're not being reached out to. And they're left thinking that Republicans got their backs. They don't. And I think that that's something that Democrats can absolutely, I would say that's one of the #1 priorities going forward for Democrats abroad, I think in general, is to try to reach out to that untapped resource, really, of the military and their families abroad.
Okay, that sounds good to me. What do you think, Candace?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that perspective, especially I'm coming to you from Germany, where there's also a large military presence, a US military presence, Korea as well. So you're right in terms of making a better connection with those service members who are overseas and their families as well who are accompanying them. So thank you for that.
Okay, well, I'm afraid it's time to wrap up. We could go on and on and on, but this is only the beginning. Remember, everybody, this is the kickoff of a big project that's going to take us all the way through the midterms and and on to the 2024 election as well. We've got a lot of work to do, and we're assembling a team of experts and people who are interested in the project. And if you have an interest in this project, please drop us a line, let us know. And we're going to organize workshops and, as I said, live workshops if possible, and if not, then online, and toolkits and so forth. So we really could use all of your help. Thank you, Dusty, for spending your valuable time with us. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in with us. I'd like to thank everybody who's been with us and remind you all that GWC has a full program of events and actions coming up, including next week on Wednesday, our Feminist Literature Club is talking about a book with a title called Women and Power. Sounds fabulous. So all you have to do is follow the link to our events page, which maybe somebody will put in the chat box for me. Please follow that link and sign up and look at some of the other things we've got going on. In closing, I'd like to give a big shout out to our volunteers, and Candace wouldn't let me get off without talking about a little tiny donation. I want to remind everybody that we are 100% volunteer here, and we're the best bargain in town when it comes to putting a little tiny bit of money into the pot, because we need money desperately to keep our organization open, and every tiny donation is greatly appreciated. So please click on the link to our donate page and give what you can, and anything will be greatly appreciated. Candace, is there anything else we need to say before we let these wonderful people go?
Yeah, no, thank you, Anne. Just one last point on that. I know you are probably getting a lot of pitches for donation requests right now. You're about to get another one, but I did just want to emphasize really the importance of the work that Democrats Abroad is doing. We are the only group within the Democratic Party that is contacting overseas voters. We made a significant impact in the 2020 election. We were the margin of victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in Arizona and in Georgia. And I think it is safe to say that overseas votes will be critical to Democrats winning races in November. So any bit that you are able to give really helps us as an organization fulfill our Get Out the Vote plan for 2022. That is now in action. We are phone banking all of the Texas voters that we have. Again, critical governor's race coming up there, the US House seats coming up there, Attorney General. The list goes on of these critical races that are happening in states like Texas. And I think it's especially relevant with the Global Women's Caucus, just the bad news that we have seen coming out of Texas. And this is our chance to fix that, fix who is in power, get people who stand behind women's rights in the governorship, in the state legislature. So really would appreciate that if you're able to help us in this endeavor, again, to contact these Texas voters and other battleground state voters abroad throughout the year. Beyond that, I just want to thank Dr. Spencer again for joining us, and really thrilled to have your expertise and input, and for your membership with Democrats Abroad as well. And to Carol and Christina for supporting with this event, and to Anne for continuing to lead the Global Women's Caucus, especially in this critical year. So thank you to everyone, and appreciate you tuning in, and hope to see you at a future Democrats Abroad event soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.